All right, man, we're in the book of James, and we're just wandering through it. And I'm so excited. I was telling Tammy, I just love going through a book. There's just something powerful about just kind of walking through this thing. And so we're just slow rolling through it. I don't know how long it's going to take us to get through. We're just going to take it as it comes. And so let me just remind you a little bit about this book. James is the half-brother of Jesus. He came to faith in Jesus after the resurrection. He was a disbeliever. In the fact that, in fact, he thought his brother was crazy, and then something transpired after. The Bible doesn't tell us that story, but history does, that he came to faith after that. And then he was the one charged with gathering the believers in Jerusalem and pastoring that church that had gathered there. And so he's the first pastor of the church in Jerusalem. It's a brutal time, lots of persecution going on. They're being beat for their faith. Because they've called themselves the Way. You've got men like Saul, who's out there trying to find the Christians and persecute them and kill them. You've got families who have disowned themselves. We don't, in our culture, it's a little hard to grab all of that. But when you're in certain cultures, and again, not to gravitate toward India, but my friend Saji, I remember, when he came to Christ and made his way home, his father beat him and then put his belongings in a suitcase and said, "You're no longer my son." And so he was on his own, right? And that's what happens. And so that's what was going on in this early church. And then if you had a business, no one's shopping there. None of your normal Jewish friends are shopping there because you've chosen to follow Messiah and they believe that you have forsaken God Jehovah. And so this is the environment that James writes. Now, many of those people had been scattered, right? There was under persecution. They were going in different places and going to other cities and trying to make new businesses and all of that. And so James writes to the church scattered, right? That's what it says. To the 12 tribes who were dispersed abroad, greetings. And so he's going to wade right into where their world is. He's going to talk about trials. And so that's what we looked at 2 weeks ago. I want to kind of give you just a review of that, and then we're going to keep plodding our way through there. We got to the first 4 verses. So let me just kind of get to that. Let me explain to you what this book is about, though. It's what I would call a book of becomings, right? Because when you and I got saved, our goal now isn't just to behave. Our goal is to become something. There is some things that we should quit doing that displease the Lord and are very unhealthy in so many ways. And there are certain things that we ought to start doing. And so we put off the old man. We put on the new man. We're made new in the attitude of our mind. And we are becoming something. This book, James is determined that the church that he's over would live outwardly what they know inwardly, right? We all know more than we're living, don't we? I mean, we know really what we ought to be doing, and we try to skirt the issue, right? And so that's kind of hypocrisy. That's two-faced. And the book of James, listen, James is going to hit us pretty hard. He's 60 times out of 108 verses, he's going to give us a command, kind of an imperative. Stop doing this or start doing that, right? And he'll speak about your tongue. How can you bless God out of one side of your mouth and then you curse your brother who's made in his image out of the other? He says these things can't be. And he'll talk about faith without works. How can you say you have faith, but yet there's no fruit that comes of that? What is that, right? And so we're going to hear these things as we go. And so he's talking here about trials. And all of us have them. Maybe not to the extent that we've talked about recently, but we all have them. Nothing helps remove hypocrisy like a trial does, because it forces you to have to determine what's going to happen and how will you respond to whatever life is going on. Trials help us grow into something that we aren't yet, right? I mean, it's the same way when you're working out. You go to work out because you want to lose weight and you want to see yourself as some hulk of a guy that looks incredible. But there's a whole lot of miles to get there before you have to do all those workouts and you have to do all of that stuff to become what you aren't yet, right? And so in the spiritual life, it's the same thing. There's certain struggles that's going to come into our life, and he calls them various. It's really the same word that we would use for the word polka dot, right? Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, right? And so some of them are minor, right? I mean, we have a little irritation, got a little tooth, thing going on, and others, we've got they're more serious life and death kind of things. Some are things that we know will pass, right? That was my mom's favorite statement to make to me every time I found myself in trouble. This too shall pass, right? But there are certain things that it comes to stay, right? It's not passing. You lose a leg, in a war or whatever, and you can get prosthetics and all of that, but that trial that came to stay, right? And so this is what happens in life, and they're meant to grow us. And so I'm just going to give you the real review real quick and just highlight the words. He says, consider. That is to reckon something, right? Consider. Let's reason together about this trial. Consider it all joy when you encounter various trials. So a trial is simply a test. And I say that, we're going to talk next week about the fact that God isn't the one who tests us. He doesn't tempt us, right? But things come that give us an opportunity to see where our faith is, right? We're told to, turn the other cheek, or we're told to forgive others. But yet, so that's easy to do when we're all happy. But all of a sudden, you come into my world and you do something evil and wrong to me. Now that's the test. Am I going to forgive you and love you, and am I love my enemy, or am I not? Right? This is where it goes. And so every test, every trial is a test to determine where I am in my spiritual journey, because what I know on the inside hasn't yet made itself on the outside. And so this is his way of doing that. Are we clear on all that? So joy, and that's that word. We choose joy. We do that because there's an end game, right? I mean, the only reason some of us diet is because summer's coming, and when we get there, I don't want my grandkids to make fun of my pot belly, right? So I'm going to try and that thing right there, I'm going to consider joy. Right, I want when my kids see me go, Papa, you look pretty cool, right? I want that as opposed to, oh, there's that old fat man. Stay away from him. I don't want anybody to know who he is, right? I mean that kind of thing. And so listen, and those are minor things, but that's what we're talking about. For the joy set before, right? And I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, but my therapy for my leg is somewhat brutal, but I love getting there. I love getting there. I crawl out of there normally because all those little muscles have begun to make work again, and they're all waking up and they're going, hey, bro, you should slow down. But I know that at some point I'm going to walk without a limp. I'm going to be able to run. I'm going to be able to hike. I'm going to be able to do my sprint. I'm going to do those things that I want to do, right? So I keep that in mind. This is what he's saying here. Consider it all joy. Like, hey, this is a good thing. This trial is going to make me better. This is how we have to see it. And this is what James is making sure we're plain about. He says, because you know, right? Consider it all joy, my brothers and sisters, when you're in various trials, knowing. And here's this is what I just smile when bad times come and think, I know something you don't know. There was a movie, Princess Bride. I don't know if you remember that or not. Remember the old sword guy that was battling, and he was sword fighting, and he gets to some point and he's smiling, and guys, what he's smiling about? He said, I know something you don't know, right? I am not left-handed, right? Yeah, I don't know if you remember that story. It was a great scene in the movie. But he's so excited because he knows something somebody else doesn't know, except the other guy was left-handed too, and it screwed the whole thing up. But anyway, the point of the deal is we know something, right? I'm not like the world. I'm not like, oh, man, what's going on? This thing's crazy. I know that God causes all things to work together for my good because I love him and have been called according to his purposes. So I know something. This thing comes into my life and it's a deficit. It feels like a deficit, right? I mean, something, all of us have them, big or small. We go, man, it's a trial, right? And so it's a deficit. But that one verse that I know and I believe to be true says that God's going to take that deficit and turn it into an asset. So I can breathe for a minute and know that, okay, well, this is not, man, this isn't anything I asked for. Not something I wanted. But okay, I'll roll with it. This is what James wants us to do. Let's roll with it, right? Because we know something. So I'm going to know that God's going to see me through this. And on the other side, I'm going to be a better man for it. Right? And so this is what's going on. If we don't know that thing, and this is why knowing the Bible matters, and this is why you and me should know truths that are solid. If we don't know that God is for us, if we don't know that we're more than conquerors through him who loved us, if we don't know that we are always at peace with him, and I will never not be at peace with him, I can't make him mad at me anymore because I'm covered by the blood of Christ, right? If I don't know all that, know that my sins are forgiven, then here's what happens. My brain gets set aside and my emotions kick in. And that's when things get crazy, right? And so what has to happen is if I don't know those things, then I'm destined to live by my feelings. And that's just not a good place to live, right? I mean, I enjoy feelings, I enjoy emotions and all that, but man, you can't let them dictate what happens in your life. They have to be a prisoner to what you know. Otherwise, you're crazy, certifiably. And so that's what goes on. So we know we're heading to perfection, to maturity. We know that when this trial, I don't want it, I don't like it, I'm gonna go through it. We may try to go around it, and I'm not saying that's a right or wrong deal, but at some point, you just got to endure it. But you know, when you get to the other side, you've grown, right? You may have been left with a limp, you may have been left with a scar, you may have been left with some kind of mark, but you made it through the other side. And this is what James wants us to do. And so we endure, right? We have to know stuff, and that's where we're going to go today, and that's what we're going to look at. Otherwise, I'm a slave to my feelings. So he says, knowledge. So he's getting ready to say, hey, if you lack something, it's called wisdom. So we're getting there in just a minute. But let me just talk to you about knowledge. Knowledge is understanding truths and facts, right? And we know knowledge. But sometimes we don't have perspective on how those truths and facts go together. And so it's when we learn how those truths and facts go together that's when things make sense to us. And so we come through this, and he says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all generously and without reproach, right? So think of a trial, whatever you got going on. I don't know what yours is, and you don't even have to call it out, but what is it? Think of a trial in your past, right? Think of one that you've already come through. Let's do that, right? What would you tell your younger self if you could go back there? Right? What would you? Because see, hopefully, I mean, we may have some people in here that don't learn through their mistakes and trials, but I'm assuming most of us have learned something. So here's a trial. Call it what it is, right? Call it. Let's say it's bankruptcy. That was a trial. You know, I mean, Tammy and I have endured that. It's not pleasant, embarrassing, and all of that. But I remember freaking out at that process and figuring out my life's over. I don't know what to do. How are we going to do this? I want to blame somebody. I want to get mad at some partners that I had that put me in that position. All those feelings were everywhere, but when we finally stepped out of the federal courthouse, hope none of you have had that experience before. If you have, it's an interesting experience. So you sit there and you have to say, well, I can't afford this, I can't afford that, and you're wondering, are they going to take the jewelry that we're wearing? What's going to happen here? You don't know anything, And so, can I keep my car? Okay, I'm going to lose my house. I'm short selling. What happens? All the dust settles. You signed your papers. You walk down those steps of that federal courthouse where we live in Birmingham, and we looked at each other, and Tammy said, we're still standing, right? I thought I needed to hear that because as a provider, the one responsible for that, I felt like I'd been the biggest screw up on the planet. Now, if I could go back and tell my younger self that, one, I would say be careful who you partner with. I mean, there's a lot of things I would tell him before you get yourself in that position, And there was a lot of stuff that we bought that was probably a little beyond what we could afford, but we figured, well, we could keep up with it. There's a lot I would say. The other thing I would say is breathe. It's going to be okay, right? Just breathe. And so I want to know what would you say? What have you learned about your trials? What would you tell your younger self? Quit lying to yourself? Would that be one of the things you would do? Right? Quit. Stop the lying. Quit living by your emotion. Whatever you feel. That gets us into a lot of trials, doesn't it? Would there be less procrastination? Would you? Because sometimes we just go, it'll just get better. It'll get better. We don't do anything. We just sit in the dirt, And yet God would have us do some things. And so maybe, hey, don't procrastinate. Maybe I'm going to pray more. Maybe I'm going to ask for wisdom more. Maybe I'm going to be a little more optimistic about what takes place. So he says, so we have a trial. Consider it joy because we know, and it's helping us become something. But if you're having trouble sorting it out, this is what he says. But if any of you lacks wisdom. Now, wisdom is knowing how the truth plays out. It's perspective, right? I know truth, but I need wisdom. I need to understand how it plays itself out. And this is, there's a verse in the scriptures that says take every thought captive, right? So I used to think what that meant was don't let that thought linger, right? Just like throw it away. It really means surrender something powerless. So knowledge says that sex outside of marriage is wrong. Adultery is wrong, right? Let's go with that one, right? Wisdom would say, let's play that thing out. So before it gets to that, maybe you don't linger too long with the companion of that's not your spouse. Maybe you don't give them a ride home. Right? There's a lot of steps that happened in between that. Wisdom is the perspective to know that it's not that end thing. It's all the steps that got me to that place, right? So that I cross that line. Well, I don't know what happened. Well, if we could throttle back, I could tell you what happened. You were stupid here, 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 and here, right? And so if you weren't so stupid here, you wouldn't even be in that situation. So don't act like you're not responsible. That's wisdom, right? And so sometimes we just need that perspective. And so this is what he says here. God gives to all who asks, and he's not even mean about it. Right? He's not going to go, well, I told you so. Right? He says without reproach. That means without fussing at you. If you cry out to him for wisdom, he's going to give it to you. So if you're stupid, it's your fault. I mean, that's kind of how I read it, right? If I'm stupid, it's my fault because he's given me wisdom in his word to tell me how to live life. But we're so busy trying to find that somewhere else. Now, he does say this. When he gives us wisdom, you go all in. Don't you start doubting. Don't you start going, well, I'll cherry pick. Well, I'm going to use this, but I kind of like my plan better than his plan. I'm just telling you, it ain't going to work, right? Wisdom has told me that. There have been time and time again, visually I see it. I write my plan out and go, hey, Lord, if you just stamp that, I'd be happy. And there are times when he allows that to happen. And I realize that didn't get me anywhere. In fact, it complicated my life a whole lot more. And it goes back to that country song, right? God's greatest blessings are unanswered prayers, right? Garth Brooks song. Because we don't know what we don't know. And so here he's telling me, listen, if you lack, you're in the middle of a trial, right? So whatever yours is, if you don't have it figured out and you're not resting in the middle of the storm, then you ought to cry out for wisdom, right? If your heart's all jumbled and it keeps doing that and you calm it and then it goes again, well, slow down. Breathe a little bit. Say, Lord, I need some wisdom here. Because he'll give you that. Some of us have all the knowledge we need, right? We watched, Gina go through cancer. We had all the knowledge about the ins and outs of that, how it got there and everything else. What we didn't have was wisdom in the process of what it looks like to trust God through that. And how do you maneuver through those things, right? And so you begin to just sit and breathe. And sometimes you do take those thoughts captive, right? You go all the way down to the end of the line and go, okay, well, it could end like I don't want it to end. Am I going to be all right with that? We do have to ask that question. And I know we all want everything to go well, but yet not every trial goes well for us, right? I mean, guys still lose their leg. People still die, right? All those things happen that we talk about. We're going to trust the Lord because on this side, that's all we know. I'm going to ask God for good things because that's the only place it comes. And so I'm going to breathe and I'm going to trust him. Because here's what I know. This is wisdom. Nothing has come into my life that wasn't first sifted through his hand. And while it feels monumental to me, this life is but a blip on the radar compared to eternity. That's not false hope. The world can't see that. That's not false hope to me. We worry way too much about what takes up that much on the span of eternity, right? And so we have to hold loosely to the things that are fleeting in this life, and that's everything. And so this is what he's called me to. This is good perspective. It's not pleasant, but this is good. And so what we find here is that I'm going to have to cry out for that wisdom, right? Here's the problem. If I don't slow down and do that, I'm going to be subject to my feels. And we know what happened with Simon Peter when he said, hey, Lord, if that's you, bid me come out on that water and let me walk to you. Come on. I got that. Peter's cool, right? Because he's walking in wisdom. You know why? Because his face is toward the Savior, right? That's where wisdom is. So he's walking. Then all of a sudden, maybe, I don't know if it was thunder. I don't know what it was. I do know the scripture says he got his eyes off of that, began to look at the swell of the waves and the storm and all that, and he got his mind off of wisdom, who he knew to be true. If Jesus said he could come out there, he could come. Everything Jesus said up to that point in Peter's life was true. Not one thing was a lie. Everything Jesus said came true. Why in the world would he think that it wouldn't happen here? Because he got his mind off the knowing of what he knew and the wisdom of what he learned, and he started looking at the circumstances. This is why we have to, this is where we are when we come to our trials, right? And so I just have to do that. It's the same thing that the 3 Hebrew children had. Listen, when they start stoking up a fire, and I don't even know what that looks like, 7 times hotter than it ought to be, and you're standing there and he said, we're going to give you one chance to bow down, are we throwing you in that furnace? And they go, hey, listen, I don't know about that, but I ain't bowing down. My God will save me. That's a powerful statement. Then he adds this caveat. And even if he does, I'm just not bowing down. Why? Because they knew where they're going, right? And so they open up that furnace, and the guys that opened it up were singed to death. Do we know the story? They didn't give you that version in Sunday school when you were a kid. They just talked about how there were 4 in the fire instead of 3. But there were men who opened up that furnace by the order of the king, and they were singed and burned to death. And then some other guys, who they are, I don't know, dumber than the first, because they go up there and toss those guys in. And then so now they're in the fire, and the king is looking, and he's going, how many were those 3 Hebrew freaks were there? How many were there? 3? Because I'm seeing 4. That's power. See, that's wisdom. Those 3 Hebrew children knew what was going to happen before it ever happened. They knew God was going to care for them, whether they burned in the fire or they made it out. And so there was no fear in their eyes. They weren't living by their emotion. They were living by one solid truth. That God is who he says he is, and he can do what he says he can do. And he deeply loves us. And if we just knew those truths, trials come, you have to see them that way. Look, you can blame the devil for the trial, and some of those are his fault. You can blame yourself for the trial because some of them are your fault. You can blame me for the trial or your friends because some of them are our fault, right? And sometimes it's just life. But at any rate, I'm going to have to come back to something in wisdom. And the only place I know where wisdom is found is just in worshiping the Lord, right? It's the only place I know. So the world ain't going to help me. Men and women who know God can help me. But not a lot of, if God don't help ain't coming. And so when I go to my trial, I'm going to start seeking wisdom. I feel like I'm ranting and overstating what is the obvious, but I just think sometimes we need to hear this. And so I'm not going to doubt. I'm not going to choose sight because that's deceptive. I'm not going to choose my feelings because that's deceptive. And I'm not going to choose fear because I have no need to. Because perfect love casts out fear. If he loves me perfectly, I don't have to be afraid. Right? And so this is gone in our world. In 2 different places, Jesus says if a son asks his father for a fish, he's not going to give him a snake, is he? If you ask God for wisdom, he's not going to give you silliness. He's going to give you truth. If you hold on to it, you might just see the other side of that trial, right? So, where are we going to get it? Well, he doesn't want me looking for second opinion. This is what he says. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives all generously and without reproach, without fussing at you. And it will be given to him. You're going to get it. Now, he must ask in faith without any doubting. For the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. So, I'm going to God. I mean, it's okay to go. There is an abundance of wisdom in counselors. But I can't trust everybody that gives me advice. Have y'all ever fallen for that trick? You know? Like the whole world tells you to do that, and you go, well, that was the stupidest thing I've ever done in my life. I've got a bunch of foolish friends. I want to find the guys that are telling me, and it sounds like Jesus when they're talking. Those are the ones I want to hear from, right? And I won't even hear the hard stuff. I don't want pablum. I don't want you to go, oh, it could be okay. No, I want you to tell me, hey, this may not be okay, right? I need that, but I need to go. But hey, let's focus on what we know, not what we see. Let's focus on what we know, not our fear. Let's focus on what we know, not our feelings. Let's settle in. Right? This is what we need. So I'm going to pray. I'm going to read Scripture. I'm going to listen, and I'm going to wait. I ain't moving until that happens. And when he says move, I'm going to move. If he says do it, I'm going to do it. Right? Now, he's man, if you don't, you're wasting your breath. Don't ask me for advice, and I give it to you. You're a double-minded person. You're unstable. You're getting ready to find the bottom of the ocean, bro. That's what's going to happen to you. That's where you're going. Bottom of the deep. That's what he says, tossed to and fro. For that person ought not to expect that he would receive anything from the Lord, being double-minded, unstable in all his ways. What's he saying? Hey, this is an opportunity if you live on the outside, which you already know to be true on the inside, right? This is. I love this, the whole passage here. Now he says this, blessed is the man. Oh, wait, yeah. Let's go back. I missed something. Verse 9. Now, the brother or sister of humble circumstances is to glory in his high position. But the rich person is to glory in his humiliation, because like the flowering grass, he will pass away. For the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the grass, and its flowers fall off, and the beauty of its appearance is destroyed. So also the rich person in the midst of his pursuits will die out. Now, let's kind of dissect that for a minute, because it's not as complicated as it sounds. He's given us two types of people. He said, hey, if you're a poor person and you got no resources, good. You don't need them anyway. You're going to glory in the fact that you're a child of the King, right? Yep. Listen, I've been through trials like that. I didn't have the resources everybody else had, and I'm trying to figure out what to do. When we made our decision that I didn't want my boys to go to public school here because the coach they wanted to play football under was like this atrocious, horrible individual, and we went to Briarwood and signed up to go. I didn't have the money to pay that. So it wasn't like I had options. And so when we got there and they said, well, you've got like 28 people, and there's only one spot. I'm like, whoo, thank you. And she said, no, you didn't hear me. She said, we have 28 spots, one person. I said, yes, ma'am, I heard you exactly. That's why I'm woohooing. Because if my son gets that one spot, that's God, right? And he going to figure it out. But you tell me, oh, there's one open, I'm still going to wonder whether we should be doing that or not. So when he got that one spot, we mustered up money to pay for 1 month of tuition there. And then the next month we went to go and somebody paid the rest of them. And so those things happen, right? This is what he's saying here. The brother of humble circumstances is the glory in his opposition. Now I'm a child of the King. If my father wants my kid to go there, he'll make it happen. I look back on that one little trial that we went through, and it gave me so much courage in so many other ways. I don't mind jumping off the deep end anymore because I'm thinking, man, I ain't got the resources, but he does, right? And so this is how we think. Then he says, hey, but listen, if you got all that stuff, I know what you're going to do. You're going to put your emphasis on your money and your resources. Oh, I can fix this up. This is what he's saying. He goes, hey, but listen to him. So, hey, to the poor folk, you don't have resources? It's cool. Glory in the fact that you have a Father on high who owns the cattle on thousands. Right? And then you're rich. Oh, hey, you can try and grab that stuff and think that money's going to do something, but it'll fall away from you as fast as it'll come to you. So you should, in that sense, he says, you should glory in your humiliation and realize that I don't really have the resources to deal with this trial, not in my hands. You still need him. Doesn't matter whether you have them or you don't. God's the one who's going to be the one that is going to take care of us in this stuff, and that's what he says. And then he says this, blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, for once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life. Now, that crown of life is mentioned in the book of the Revelation, which we looked at early on. It is really the martyr's crown, but I don't think it's limited to that, because when he talks about crown of life and what Jesus promises was an abundant life, abundant living means we live not like the world does. We live abundantly because we have light, life, and love, because we see things now. I'm different than the world, right? So when I pass through that test and I have trusted in him and he has given me his light, he has given me life, the ability to withstand these trials, and he's given me the ability to love others in the midst of all of that stuff, that there's a crown of abundant living. That's what abundant life looks like. to be free from the circumstances of this life, trusting that He will see me through. And even if He does not, even if this is the day that my expiration date happens, I'm going to be all right, right? That's the message that we find in the book of James so far. We're going to look next week at testing and temptations, and so come on back and hang out with that. And man, let's sing a song, and we'll close out our morning.